Ever get that feeling like you just want to cut through all the noise and really get a grip on something, something complex, without having to like piece it together from a million different places?
Absolutely.
That's kind of what we're doing today.
Totally.
We're diving deep into this thing called the Hippie Trail.
Right.
It was this incredible overland adventure that basically drew tons of young people from the West eastward in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
They were searching for all sorts of things, alternative ways of living,
Right.
deeper spiritual connections,
Yeah.
a simpler existence, the whole bit.
Definitely. It really was a significant countercultural movement,
Oh, yeah.
What started as just like a small trickle of these like really intrepid individuals
Right.
kind of turned into this huge phenomena.
Really did.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together some really interesting stuff from this YouTube transcript.
Oh,
It really gets into like the nitty-gritty of the trail's beginnings,
okay.
the routes people took, the places that were like super important along the way,
Yeah.
and then its lasting influence.
Yeah.
Like
I'm curious about that.
how it's still with us in a way.
Yeah. So, like, what are we trying to figure out here?
Well, I think our goal is to really understand what made so many people want to journey all the way to the east.
Okay.
What were the paths they forged, the actual routes? Like, what was it actually like for them to do that?
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, why this whole era of travel kind of faded out.
Okay. So, starting right at the beginning then.
Okay.
What was it that sparked this whole eastward movement? It wasn't just out of the blue, was it?
No, not at all. The transcript highlights a few things that kind of came together.
Okay.
I think a key thing was this deep disillusionment with like all the consumerism,
Right. Yeah.
materialism that was so big in the West after World War II.
Yeah.
So many young people felt kind of empty, even though everything looked good on the surface.
Yeah.
They had all this stuff, but it wasn't doing it for them. And they started to question, like, what does success really mean?
Right.
Is this it?
That totally makes sense. I can see how that feeling of something missing could become really powerful.
Exactly. And all this was happening while there was all this political stuff going on.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The Vietnam War was like this massive source of anxiety, especially in the U.S. And then you had the Cold War.
Right.
It was like this constant tension underneath everything.
It was just there.
Yeah. And the transcript really points to 1968 as like this pivotal year.
Really?
Yeah, they call it the year of cultural revolution.
Yeah.
Because you had all these student protests breaking out all over Europe,
Oh, wow. Like where?
like Paris, West Germany, the Prague Spring.
So this was about way more than just travel.
Oh, yeah. It was a total rejection of how things were.
Yeah.
Like this urge to break free from all these rules and expectations.
So where does the East fit into all of this?
Well, the East had all these old spiritual traditions, and they put way more emphasis on living simply, not on all the material stuff. So it was really appealing to these young people who were disillusioned with the West.
Right.
Suddenly these concepts like karma,
Okay.
the idea that your actions have consequences,
Right.
nirvana, yoga, meditation, it wasn't just some abstract idea.
Yeah.
It was like this real path to a different way of being.
A different way of finding meaning, right?
Exactly.
It wasn't just a vague feeling, though, right?
Yeah.
There were people who really shaped this interest in the East.
Definitely. The transcript mentions authors like Aldous Huxley,
Oh, yeah.
Alan Watts,
Uh-huh.
Herman Hesse. His book Siddhartha was huge.
I can see why.
It's all about this guy finding spiritual awakening through Eastern philosophy.
Right.
But I think one of the biggest things that happened was the Beatles,
Oh, yeah.
their trip to India in '68.
Oh, yeah. Rishikesh.
Right, to study transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
It was like a global event. Everyone knew about it.
It really was.
So the biggest band in the world at the time engages with all this Eastern stuff.
Yep.
That must
Yeah.
had a huge impact.
It brought this whole thing into the mainstream.
Right.
Gave it a certain coolness.
I mean, they brought those sounds and ideas back with them too, right?
Oh, totally.
I remember like sitars and stuff in their music after that.
Yeah, like Norwegian wood and Within You, Without You.
Right.
They used Indian instruments and musical structures in those songs.
It was like a whole different world.
Totally.
And albums like Steak Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and the White Album.
Yeah, they definitely explored those themes in their lyrics.
So we understand the why.
Okay.
Now, where did they actually go? I know it was eastward, but like, were there actual routes?
Yeah, the transcript talks about 3 main overland routes
Okay.
that kind of made up the Hippie Trail.
Okay.
The busiest one was the classic overland route.
Yeah.
Imagine it starts in all these big European cities. London, Amsterdam, Paris,
Wow, so it's drawing people from all over Europe.
Yeah, and then also like Brussels, Munich, Vienna, Belgrade, Sofia.
And all these paths eventually meet up.
Yeah, they all converge in Istanbul.
Istanbul makes sense, right on the edge of Europe and Asia.
It was the gateway.
So what happened after Istanbul?
From Istanbul, they would go through Ankara and Erzurum in Turkey, and then they crossed into Iran.
Oh.
They would stop in places like Tabriz and Mashhad.
And
then it was Afghanistan, Herat, Kandahar.
Okay.
Kabul was a big one.
Right.
And then they'd cross the Khyber Pass into Pakistan.
Wow.
Through Peshawar and Lahore. India was like the main destination for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So they'd go to Amritsar, Delhi, Varanasi.
Varanasi is that holy city, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Right on the Ganges.
Yeah.
And then finally Goa. The beaches.
Yep.
And for a lot of people, the journey ended in Kathmandu.
Kathmandu, Nepal. Yeah. What a trip.
Seriously.
You mentioned other routes too, though, right?
Yeah, there's the southern route. That one also started with people meeting in Istanbul. But then it went south.
Okay.
Izmir and Antalya in Turkey. Then into Iran at Shiraz.
Yeah. Cool.
And then through Karachi in Pakistan, and then into India.
Okay.
A lot of times through Rajasthan. So like Jaipur, Jodhpur, Mumbai.
Oh, wow.
And then Goa and maybe Kathmandu or other places in India like Rishikesh.
Okay, so that's 2 routes.
Yeah. And then the third one.
This is the one that goes more north. Right?
Yeah, the Central Asian route is probably the most adventurous.
Oh, wow.
From Istanbul, it went through Tehran and Mashhad.
Okay.
Then into Afghanistan, but further north this time.
So like we're...
Bamiyan, those Buddhist statues.
Yeah.
Well, they were there then.
Right.
Gilgit, Baltistan, Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. Then down to Rishikesh and finally Kathmandu.
Wow. Okay, so these sound like pretty intense journeys.
Were.
But why go overland at all? Why not just fly?
That's a good question.
It seems like a lot of extra hassle.
Well, the transcript emphasizes that the overland journey was like a big part of the experience.
Okay, so it wasn't just about getting there.
No, they wanted to really experience the cultures and places they were traveling through.
Right.
Connect with the people, see the landscapes change.
That makes sense.
Plus, flying was super expensive back then.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Not really an option for most of these travelers.
So the act of traveling itself was part of it, almost like a pilgrimage.
Exactly.
And I imagine with all these people traveling the same routes, certain things started to pop up along the way.
Right.
Like places to stay and things like that.
Yeah, like budget-friendly places to stay, cafes, restaurants.
Catering to Western backpackers.
Exactly. And they started showing up in all the major cities.
Like which ones?
Istanbul, Kabul, Delhi.
They became like hubs.
They did.
And the transcript mentions some specific places too, right?
It does. Like in Istanbul, there was this district, Sultanahmet.
Okay.
That became known for its cheap lodgings.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah. And then there was the pudding shop.
The what?
It was actually called the Lale Restaurant. But everyone called it the pudding shop. Because they had all these different puddings.
Oh.
Which were easier for travelers to point at and order.
That's hilarious.
It became like this landmark.
A place where everybody met up.
Yeah, swap stories.
So cool.
Yeah, what about the other stops on the trail? What are you curious about?
Well, you mentioned Iran. Like, wasn't it kind of strange that they were going there?
Well, this was during the time of the Shah.
Okay.
And Iran was modernizing.
Oh.
They were pretty open to Westerners.
Interesting.
Iran was like this bustling city.
Okay.
With amazing bazaars and palaces.
So a lot to see.
Yeah, and the country itself had all these different landscapes.
Okay.
Mountains, deserts, everything.
What about Afghanistan? You mentioned Kabul was important.
Yeah, it became like a central hub.
Okay.
The Afghan people were known for being super hospitable.
Oh, that's nice.
And there was this street called Chicken Street.
Chicken Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was full of shops selling all sorts of stuff.
Like what?
Carpets, jewelry, and hashish.
Hashish.
Yeah, it was pretty common there.
Interesting.
And the Bamiyan Valley was another big draw.
With the Buddha statue.
Yeah, it was this major cultural and spiritual site.
Yeah.
And of course, the Khyber Pass.
That's the one that goes through the mountains, right?
Yeah, super dramatic and historically significant.
So then India.
India.
For a lot of people, that was the final destination.
It was the ultimate goal.
What was it like for them?
Well, Delhi was kind of crazy.
I can imagine.
Chaotic, but full of history.
Yeah.
But for those seeking spirituality, Varanasi was the place to be.
Right on the Ganges.
Yeah, super intense and powerful.
And then there's Goa.
Goa.
The ultimate hippie haven.
Totally.
What was it about Goa that made it so special?
Well, you've got these beautiful beaches, this super relaxed atmosphere, really welcoming local communities.
Sounds idyllic.
Kind of was.
It became a real subculture, didn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Like its own little world.
Definitely. Lots of parties.
I bet.
Psychedelic music, substances like karas.
Karas.
Yeah, it's like a type of hashish.
Oh, okay.
And people were living in communes and stuff.
Wow, so a really alternative way of life.
Yeah. And for a lot of travelers, Kathmandu was the last stop.
Kathmandu in Nepal.
Yeah.
Known for those ancient temples.
Yeah, tons of them.
And I guess it was easy to find cheap places to stay.
Guest houses everywhere.
And what was that street? Freak Street?
Oh, yeah. Freak Street was legendary.
Like, what was it?
It was where the Western and local cultures kind of met and mixed.
Wow.
It was a whole scene.
And they were pretty open about drug use there, weren't they?
Yeah, at least until the mid-'70s when they cracked down on it.
Okay.
But yeah, Kathmandu had it all.
Plus the Himalayas right there.
Yeah.
Amazing for trekking.
Totally.
So it sounds like most of these destinations were accessible overland.
Mostly.
But you mentioned Thailand was an exception.
Yeah, Thailand was a bit different.
Okay.
It was a popular destination. Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Koh Samui.
Those islands, yeah.
But most people had to fly there.
Oh, why was that?
Well, the land border through Myanmar, it was Burma back then.
Okay.
It was pretty much closed off.
Why?
There was a military regime in power.
Uh-huh.
And the terrain was super difficult anyway.
So Thailand was kind of off the beaten path?
You could say that.
And what about Morocco?
Morocco, that's a good one.
It seems kind of far from everything else.
It was a bit of an outlier.
Okay.
But Essaouira, this town on the Atlantic coast,
Yeah.
became a big hippie hangout.
Really?
Yeah, separate from the main routes.
What was it about Essaouira?
It was this mix of things.
Okay.
Really rich culture.
Uh-huh.
Lots of art.
Okay.
Super laid-back vibe.
Great.
And it was easy to get hashish there.
Makes sense.
And there are even stories that Jimi Hendrix helped make it popular.
No way, Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, apart from the places themselves,
Yeah.
what was the culture of the Hippie Trail actually like?
What made it unique?
Well, the transcript brings up a few key things.
Okay.
The most iconic thing has got to be the Volkswagen Combi van.
The VW bus.
Yeah, it was like the symbol of the movement.
The original Scooby-Doo van?
Exactly.
So cool.
But it wasn't all about personal vehicles.
Right.
Hitchhiking was huge.
Yeah.
And then you had these bus companies.
Yeah.
The most famous one was the Magic Bus.
The Magic Bus? I've heard of that.
They offered these cheap overland journeys.
Connecting Europe and Asia.
Exactly.
And the name, the Magic Bus, it's so evocative, you know?
Oh, yeah, it perfectly captures the whole spirit of the thing.
Freedom, adventure.
Totally.
There's even a book about it, right?
Yeah, Rory McLean wrote a book about it in 2006.
What's it called?
Magic Bus on the Hippie Trail, from Istanbul to India.
I'll have to check that out.
It's really good.
And speaking of books, didn't Lonely Planet start because of the Hippie Trail?
It did.
That's crazy.
The transcript talks about how Tony and Maureen Wheeler went on an overland trip in '72.
Uh-huh.
And they realized there was no good guidebook for budget travelers.
Oh, wow.
So they made their own.
What was it called?
Across Asia on the cheap.
Makes sense.
And it became super popular.
So that's how Lonely Planet was born.
Pretty much.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they really created something special.
So resourcefulness was key.
Absolutely.
They had to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah, and there were no smartphones or internet back then.
Right.
They had to rely on each other.
Right.
And word of mouth.
I also have to ask about drug use.
It was definitely part of the scene.
Was it a problem?
Well, the transcript mentions hashish, opium, and unfortunately, heroin.
Right.
They were all pretty easy to come by.
Okay.
And they were definitely used by some travelers.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that not everyone was using drugs.
Of course.
There were plenty of people who were just there for the adventure and the cultural experience.
Right.
And the music. The music was huge.
What were they listening to?
Psychedelic rock, mostly.
Like what bands?
Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Pink Floyd.
The soundtrack to a generation.
Totally.
And you mentioned community earlier.
Oh, yeah, that was a big part of it.
What was that like?
People were always meeting up, playing music together, sharing stories.
Really embracing that freedom.
Absolutely. It was about connecting with people from all over the world.
It sounds almost utopian.
In some ways it was.
But you also mentioned the Bikini Killer earlier.
Right, Charles Sipraj.
He was a real dark spot on this whole thing.
He was.
Preying on those young travelers.
It's a scary reminder that even in the most idealistic environments,
Yeah.
there can be danger.
What did he actually do?
He would charm these young Western travelers, often pretending to be a helpful friend or guide.
Wow, so manipulative.
Yeah, and then he would drug them, rob them, and eventually murder them.
That's awful.
It's thought that he killed at least a dozen people, maybe more.
Wow.
He was finally caught in India in 76,
That's good.
but he escaped from prison multiple times.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And then he was caught again in Nepal in 2003.
Wow. What happened to him?
He was sentenced to life in prison.
Okay.
But get this, he was released in 2022.
What?
Yeah, because of his health.
That's insane.
I know, it's a crazy story.
So he got away with it, essentially.
Pretty much.
That's so sad for the families of his victims.
It is. It's a really tragic story.
So we talked about the good and the bad.
Okay.
What happened to the hippie trail? Why did it end?
Well, the late 70s saw the beginning of the end.
Okay.
A lot of things happened all at once.
Like what?
Well, the Iranian Revolution in 79 was a big one.
Okay.
The Shah was overthrown and the Islamic Republic was established.
Right.
Iran became much less welcoming to Westerners.
So that closed off a big part of the trail.
Yeah, and then the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan happened the same year.
That must have made things really difficult.
Oh yeah, traveling through Afghanistan became pretty much impossible.
And you said Pakistan became more conservative.
Yeah, and there was more political instability there too.
So traveling through that region became more dangerous.
It did.
So these big political shifts basically shut down the hippie trail.
In a way, yeah.
But it wasn't just politics, right?
You're right, there were other factors too.
The transcript mentioned that the types of travelers changed.
Yeah, the original spirit of spiritual exploration kind of faded.
Okay.
And it became more about, just doing drugs and partying.
Like drug tourism.
Exactly. And with more heroin use and drug smuggling,
Okay.
authorities started cracking down.
Makes sense.
And then in the 80s, budget airlines and package tours became a thing.
Oh, yeah.
So suddenly the whole overland journey thing seemed less appealing.
People wanted convenience.
Yeah, and they felt safer flying.
So the hippie trail just kind of faded away.
It did, but not without leaving a mark.
What do you mean?
Well, some of those hippie communities stuck around.
Like where?
Goa is a good example.
Oh, right. Goa.
Yeah, it still has that alternative vibe. And in terms of travel as a whole,
Yeah.
the hippie trail showed that you could travel cheaply
Okay.
and independently
Right.
and really immerse yourself in different cultures.
So it had a lasting influence.
Definitely. It paved the way for the kind of travel we see today.
Even though things are so different now.
Right. We have the internet and all these apps and websites.
Yeah.
But that desire to connect with different cultures,
Yeah.
to have authentic experiences,
Yeah.
that's still there.
And you could argue that it's even more important now with all this focus on social media and curated experiences.
The transcript calls it Instagram influence travel.
It's all about getting the perfect picture.
Exactly. But the hippie trail was about something deeper.
Right. It was about connecting with the world on a real level.
Exactly.
So what are the big takeaways here? What can we learn from all this?
Well, I think the hippie trail shows us that people have this deep desire for something more.
More than what?
More than just the material stuff. They want to connect, to explore, to find meaning.
And that's something that's still relevant today.
Totally. It's human nature.
And the fact that Lonely Planet came out of this movement,
Yeah, it's amazing.
it shows how powerful this desire to travel and experience the world can be.
It's a legacy that continues to inspire.
So for everyone listening,
Yeah.
think about what you want to get out of travel.
Right.
Do you want the easy, curated experience? Or do you want something more challenging, more immersive, more like what those hippie trail travelers experienced?
It's a good question to ask yourself.
Especially in this world where we're constantly bombarded with information and images.
It's easy to get caught up in the hype.
But maybe there's something to be said for slowing down,
Yeah,
taking the road less traveled,
definitely.
and really discovering what's out there.
Exactly.
That's something worth thinking about long after this deep dive is over.
I think so too.
It's a question that goes beyond just travel, really.
Yeah, it's about how we want to live our lives
How we want to experience the world.
and what we want to leave behind.
It's something we all have to figure out for ourselves.